Stories are incredibly powerful. They can evoke extremely deep and powerful emotions, from immense joy to extreme anger, or it can make you even cry tears of real sadness. Even though it's just a story, it's not necessarily real. When I think of some of my favorite stories, I think of some of my favorite movies and generally these movies that I loved evoked these strong emotions. But a story doesn't always take 2 hours to tell. In fact, one of the shortest stories is often attributed to Ernest Hemingway, and it's only 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And those 6 words can evoke some very deep emotions in different people. All I'm trying to say is no one can deny the power of a story, whether that's 6 words or 2 hours of dialogue. Ow. GoPro, start recording. Since stories are so powerful, wouldn't that also be the same about the story that we tell ourselves? And that's a story we often don't think about, but the story, the narrative of our lives that goes on in our minds, that shapes our reality. That shapes our perspective on our experiences, on our relationships, on life in general. So understanding that the story that we tell ourselves is that powerful, I think it's important for us to be mindful of that story that we tell ourselves, because it will either empower us or limit us. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, is essentially an entire book dedicated to this idea that we are empowered or hindered or limited by the story that we tell ourselves. The meaning that we give our lives can be the difference between, in his case, survival or death in these concentration camps. I want to read one small quote from his book. It says, "Whenever there was an opportunity for it, one had to give them, the Jewish prisoners, a why for their lives in order to strengthen them to bear the terrible how of their existence." In other words, what I think he's trying to say is that the why, the story that explains why, gives the meaning for them to be able to endure such terrible things that happened to them in the concentration camps. And he talks about how that was the key indicator. If they were able to tell themselves a good enough story, they could support any how. They could support any suffering. And I think that's pretty powerful. Think about a 7th grader that failed a test. They can either tell themselves, I am a terrible student, and that becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, according to Viktor Frankl. Or they can say, I didn't prepare as well as I should have. I'm smarter than this. I will study extra hard next time and pass the next test. Another example would be someone that recently got divorced. You can say, I hate my ex-wife or ex-husband. They ruined my life. Or you can say, I'm going to work on myself so that I don't have to endure this kind of pain again. There's many stories, and I'm presenting a false dichotomy. There's not 2 stories you can tell yourself, but these are 2 stark examples of 2 different paths you could take out of an infinite number of paths. This concept reminds me of the Buddhist parable of the second arrow. The parable talks about how there's 2 arrows that are shot at you when something happens. And the first arrow is almost always unavoidable. You can't do much to avoid it, but the second arrow is your reaction to the first arrow. And that one is optional. In other words, there are things that are going to happen in our lives that are painful. And whether or not we get hit by a second arrow depends on whether or not we can react in the correct way, and we can react in a healthy way. And that reaction is often the story we tell ourselves. So there are painful things that happen to us, and our reaction and the story we tell ourselves will decide whether or not we suffer needlessly over the painful thing that was inevitable. And this concept that we're talking about today, the narrative that we tell ourselves shapes our lives, this is backed up by dozens of studies that have been done, and this is even linked back to the placebo effect. So science has backed this up. What these studies say, what the placebo effect shows, is that it's not the trajectory that determines the narrative, it's the narrative that determines the trajectory. And obviously there are exceptions to this rule. I'm not saying we should walk around with just positive stories all the time and this air of toxic positivity around us. There are times where sadness is necessary, but the difference is I don't think we should be suffering needlessly. In summary, what I'm trying to say is that the narrative that we tell ourselves is often incomplete, and we as humans, we don't like that feeling of uncertainty. We want to know, we want to have a complete story, and so we often fill the gaps of the why or the how or anything like that, any of the ambiguity, we fill it with a story. And that story oftentimes isn't necessarily true, and it's almost always affected by our biases and our perspective and the lenses that we have through which we see life. And so understanding that story that we tell ourselves dictates the trajectory of our life, if we can just be a little bit more mindful of that, I think we can take that parable of the second arrow and understand that a lot of the suffering that we induce or that we put on ourselves is optional. Anyways, I hope this was as interesting to you as the idea is to me. I hope it was somewhat clear. Oftentimes, since I'm definitely not an expert on any of this, I feel like I just ramble and a lot of it doesn't make sense. But anyways, if it was interesting, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and start a conversation with someone that you'd like to talk about this with, because that's ultimately what I want this to be, is a conversation starter, something for you to think about and to talk about with your friends or family. So anyways, thanks for watching.
But that I was different, maybe I'm not what you wanted. Living a lie, I'm living a lie. Oh, caught between the truth and all the things that leave me haunted. Living a lie, I'm living a lie. Oh, no, if I give it